We'd like to make an announcement today. It's a particular project that we, in fact, have been working upon since December last year. And we have subsequently, in January and February and March of this year, have had meetings with the World Bank. We'd like to announce today that we will now be changing the financial year for the Fijian government, which basically means that, as you know, at the moment our financial year has always been January to December. We deliver the budget in November. By law you have to deliver it before the end of November, and then the budget is then debated by Parliament, and then the budget applies from 1st January to 31st December. That's the financial year. There are of course many countries that have different financial years. Some countries, their financial year starts on the 1st of April, goes on to the 31st of March. Some countries have their financial years that start on 1 July and ends on the 30th of June in the following year. Some countries, of course, and many countries, of course, have the calendar year as their financial year. And Fiji has had the calendar year as the financial year. But we, of course, are going to change that now. And that's the announcement we'd like to make. Our financial year is going to now begin from the 1st of August till the following July. So there'll be the 1 year cycle that we will have. There is a number of reasons, and of course we've been studying this for quite some time regarding the financial year, whether it is in fact suitable for us, taking into effect a number of considerations that does affect small island economies like ours and the practicalities on the ground. The first being, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you a very practical example of it, is that because our financial year also is the calendar year, and the tax months in which, for example, companies pay their taxes, they're paid in 4 months, in April, June, September and December. So most of them actually pay their taxes in December. So last year, FIRCA received revenue of about $67 million on the 31st of December. Now what that meant was that if FIRCA receives $67 million on the 31st of December at 4 p.m. or 4:30 p.m., it does not get transferred to the government books on that day itself. So that $67 million, using that as an example, if it hits the government books after the 31st of December, it means that revenue is received by government in 2016, not 2015. And when countries like ours and like many other countries, in particular small island states and other smaller economies, are very much running a very tight budget where your deficits, your stated deficits, can get out of whack or out of kilter if that revenue is not received in that year. Then your deficit could be more because you have actually budgeted to receiving that $67 million in December, but because FIRCA receives it late, it comes on the 1st of January into the government books, it affects your deficit for 2015, for example. So it is a very fine line. You only have 1 day or a few hours to ensure that it actually hits your books in that specific year. It's not a very good space to be in, because if you are, for example, telling Parliament, if you're telling the World Bank, if you're telling other institutions and other rating agencies that are looking at you and basically saying that if you state that your deficit will be 2.8 or 2.5, or you'll be able to collect this much revenue, and simply it's just a question of timing, then obviously it is not a very good look, because you are then your figures get out of whack. So it's not a very good area to be in. So that's one of the first reasons. The second reason, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is that many countries, not just Fiji, suffer from what you may call Christmasitis. So people actually go on a holiday mode. If your budget is being approved by Parliament in November or early December, and then you need all the ministries to actually stay and plan as to how the budget will be spent and how they utilize it, most people are going on holidays in December. People go into Christmas mode, even in fact early January too. That is a big problem, and in fact many other countries suffer from this issue. So in order to avoid that, it is also not a good space to be in when your budget is actually going to start on 1 January, but you have to do all that planning beforehand, and it does not get done because it is the holiday season. So that's a very practical reason. The other issue, of course, is that if your financial year starts in January, and it is also the calendar year, we are smack in the middle of the cyclone season. The cyclone season in Fiji starts from November, it ends at the end of April. So you can very well have a very well planned budget that's approved by Parliament in November, and suddenly within a month or two you can get all out of whack, because you may have completely unplanned for set of circumstances that is beyond human control that has an impact on your budget. And the reality is that climate change doesn't have an impact on the way we used to do things before. In the same way as we may want to move villages to higher ground because of rising sea levels, in the same way that we may need to reinforce our buildings in a much better way because of the force at which we're getting cyclones now. In the same way, and this is what we call adaptation, we need to put in place adaptation policies that takes account of the ground realities that we are facing now in the 21st century as countries and states that have to function with these sets of realities. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the three critical reasons as to why the budget, or financial year I should say, is now being moved and will be moved by government. The permanent secretaries and all the ministers who were present at the permanent secretary briefing were informed of this last week about the new financial year that will begin from 1 August for us, which of course in practical terms means that this year's financial year obviously will be a shorter year, which commenced in January. It will now end on the 31st of July, and the new financial year will begin from 1st of August 2016. It will end on the 31st of July 2017. So this will now be our new budget cycle. This of course has some ramifications in terms of the manner in which the funds will be utilized from January to July of this year, and of course the next year will be the fuller year. We've had some very good discussions with World Bank, as I said, since we've been talking to them since January of this year. We've discussed and looked at a number of other countries as to how they run their budgets. We have seen, in fact, recently some countries move their budget cycles. They moved it to different periods of time. At the moment, we can see that there's not one specific country that we have surveyed so far that has their budget year starting on the 1st of August. We assume some may follow, but there, of course, many countries have the financial year from April till March. For a country like Fiji, where we have the cyclone season ending in the end of April, it's obviously not a good time to start your budget year. Then you have other countries like Australia, etc., that bring or commence their financial year from 1 July to the 30th of June. Again, for us, the issue is about the payments that we do receive from the various corporations, etc. And the June is also a month in which they make payments. So if you started your budget year again in July and ended on 30th of June, again, it's not a good space to be in because you're still cutting a very fine line. There are other countries, for example, the USA, that they have their financial year that starts in October. Their financial year starts from October to September. And there, of course, the United Kingdom, their financial year starts from 6th of April till the 5th of April. You have countries like Samoa, their budget year starts on 1 June and ends on the 31st of May. So different countries, of course, have their different reasons for their financial years. From from our perspective, from the Fijian perspective, we looked at the number of factors. We have to ensure that the figures that we do have do not run into actually problems if we have the revenue coming in just a few hours before that financial year is supposed to end. So that is very important for us to ensure that we are not in that space. Secondly, of course, is that we need to ensure that whenever the budget has been approved by Parliament, we immediately get into the planning stage of it and for the implementation of it. And of course, the third major reason being that we don't want to be into a space where you smack in the middle of the cyclone season, which is a reality. And we suspect some of the other countries that are vulnerable to the tropical cyclones, etc., in particular small island states, they will also engineer their financial years to suit their situations. So, for example, our cyclone season may be from November to April in the southern Pacific, but in the Indian Ocean or in the Caribbean, their cyclone seasons are in different periods. So these are some of the three critical factors. The Ministry of Finance team will start meeting the different ministries, respective ministries, next week to start the baseline and looking at the various budgetary submissions. We obviously will go to Parliament. As you know, the parliamentary sittings coming forward is in April and June, and the next one being in August, of course. We will, of course, be talking to the Honourable Madam Speaker and the Business Committee to be able to have a sitting, to bring the November sitting forward, at the very least to have it in July, so then we can debate the budget, present the budget, and then debate the budget and have it ready for implementation from the 1st of August. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the announcement that we wanted to make, and this obviously is quite a significant move, but nonetheless a very positive move, because it takes into account the ground realities in our financial calendar. It takes account the administrative realities and also issues pertaining to companies and revenue collection, and of course the issue pertaining to climatic changes that are taking place. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Just a clarification. So the government's proposing a national budget announcement in August?
No, the financial year will start on the 1st of August. And so the budget, as you know, for example, for the budget, say this year, we presented it in November, and then Parliament debates it. Then you have it approved, by latest end of November or the latest early December for implementation from 1 January. So in the same way, we would expect to have the budget presented to Parliament in July and have it debated and done with in July, for it to actually commence from the 1st of August. So June, July is the period that we are looking at for presentation to Parliament. You will note that many countries that have made a switch, for example, New Zealand and various other countries that have recently made a switch, some other countries for which we have the data for, you either can have a shorter year, the year before that, or you have a longer year. So if you know what I mean, so for example, our financial year is from January to December, which we have now. So we could have stretched it all the way from January all the way to August next year. I have this, nearly as long as 18 months or so. Alternatively, you make this year shorter, this budget year shorter, and then you start the actual budget year, the new budget year, from the date that you want it from, so which is the 1st of August from this year. So the preceding year, which is what we are now in, is a shorter year.
So what happened to the previous budget?
Sorry?
What happened to the previous budget?
What happened?
Yeah, I mean, it will be moved to included in the new budget you're going to prepare from this year onwards, or?
I don't understand your question.
I meant the budget which is prepared in November.
Which we already in it. This is the money that is in the budget now.
So will it be included in the budget which you're going to prepare now?
No, obviously you can't, because you have to start a new budget. If you mean whether some of the programs that had been allocated, of course some of the programs will continue. So for example, there may be a capital project that was going to be implemented in, say, September of this year, then obviously that'll come in the new budget year. But there may have been projects that's already done this year, so that won't be factored in to the program for next year. There are also at the same time projects that are ongoing projects. So you could have for example, the building of, say, a hospital that would have been, taken 18 months. So that would have been budgeted for, factored in over 2 budget periods. Could have been 2016, 2017. So now, if some of those monies have been spent, obviously Ministry of Finance team will go through that as to how much monies have been spent for the particular project, what is the remainder that's left to be spent, or what is the remainder amount required to complete that project, then that gets extrapolated into the following year or years. Yeah?
So how long has government been considering this change, and how is it expected to impact the GDP, considering the damage caused by tropical cyclone?
Well, they're two separate questions. We've been, as I mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, in fact, the idea came around about after the budget last year, in December, and we had our first meeting with the World Bank team on the 14th of January of this year. So it's been playing way ahead of Winston, if that is the question. This is not being done because of Winston. It was in fact already a project on foot. Regarding the GDP, from what we understand, the Reserve Bank of Fiji had predicted a GDP growth of 3.7% after the budget announcement last year. From what we understand now, that budget after Cyclone Winston, the growth rate has been revised downwards to 2.2. Now, in terms of what will be the growth rate predicted for next year, obviously that needs to be recalibrated, given the fact that the financial year will now commence in August. So that's something obviously the Reserve Bank of Fiji will do, and then of course we'll be taking that into account when we make the budget announcement.
So you had announced earlier 1.2 billion for the damage bill.
I had said in excess of $1 billion regarding the fact that not just actual physical damage, but also the economic activity, the downgrading of economic activity. So if you calculate, for example, loss of working hours, if you calculate the opportunity cost that is lost, if you calculate, for example, things like when you don't have a particular part of the country without electricity, then it does have an economic impact, a negative economic impact. So a person who may have been, for example, selling ice cream in Tavua, if he does not have access to electricity that makes ice blocks for him on which he puts the ice cream, then it stops him or her from going and selling that ice cream. So there's a loss of income. In the same way, we had initially a lot of people who were middlemen fishermen who used to buy fish, and they used to be the middlemen, they used to have freezer plants, etc. So some of them for a couple of weeks did not have access to those facilities, so there's a loss of income for people who were selling it to them, and of course these people were selling it on to other people. So these are the types of costs that you take into account. It's not just physical loss. You can't just say, oh, because 10 power poles have fallen down, therefore, the cost of each power pole is say $1,000, therefore we've lost $10,000. It's not just that you look at, that's the actual physical cost of the putting up the infrastructure. Or you don't just say, oh, the Irish crossing was washed away in the interior of Ra, and it cost, $80,000 to build it. But the farmers or the villagers who live on the other side of the road, they have not had the ability to perhaps take down their root crops and sell and make a living. So you also can take that into consideration as part of the overall loss factor from the cyclone itself.
What are the funding plans for that? How much has it been established? How much will come from government and overseas?
Funding plans for
the total cost of damage.
Well, there's a lot of instances where government obviously already has started funding. There are schools that have been immediately been fixed up. There's certain infrastructure that government has already provided infrastructure, means to build up the infrastructure, whether it's temporary crossings, whether it's temporary shelters, whether it's temporary, patch up work to schools so they can start running. But in respect of, for example, we can give you an example regarding public buildings, what we call, which has school buildings and also nursing stations and government buildings. As was announced by the Honourable Prime Minister, there's a group of engineers who are actually currently going out and carrying out detailed assessments and we of course are waiting for those detailed assessments. Those assessments carry out the cost of, or assess the cost of, intermediate needs, and you have some long-term needs. So for example, there may be certain schools, the intermediate needs may be that, what will it be to for the building to be fully functional and for the students to feel safe underneath that. The long-term goal may be, well, hang on, because it's built out of timber, maybe it needs to be concreted. So these are the kind of assessments that are being carried out, and we'll be able to give much better figures once we have all those assessments in.